They say the Appalachian highways hold more than just fog and winding roads. They have secrets. Stories whispered by truckers, hikers, and late-night patrolmen who swear they saw something, or someone, that shouldn't exist. If you're brave enough to keep watching, remember, once you hear these stories, you can't unhear them. Your like helps this video reach more horror fans like you, and it tells me to keep digging up the darkest tales I can find. Comment where you're watching from. Every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family is tuning in. And once you've made it to the end, tell me, which story haunted you the most? Finally, subscribe. Your support helps keep creepy souls alive, and some say it even keeps them away. Now, let's begin. It was close to midnight when I hit the fog on Route 19. I'd been driving for almost 6 hours straight, heading south through the Appalachian Mountains after a work trip in West Virginia. My GPS kept cutting out, and the radio was just static, so it was just me, the hum of the engine, and the wet sound of tires against pavement. The fog was thick enough to feel like it was pressing against the windshield, heavy, pale, almost solid. The kind of fog that seems to move with you. I slowed down to maybe 30 miles an hour, gripping the wheel tighter than I should have. Then I saw her. She was walking along the shoulder, or limping, more like it. An old woman, wearing a long gray coat and a scarf over her head. She didn't have an umbrella, no flashlight, no car nearby. Just a hunched silhouette in that milky fog, her figure swallowed by it as soon as I passed. At first, I told myself to keep driving. I was tired, the visibility was garbage, and people around here were known to be unpredictable. But something about the way she was walking, slow, uneven, like she was hurt, made me pull over about 30 feet ahead. I left my headlights on. When I looked in the rearview mirror, she was gone. No woman, no movement, just fog. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, waiting for her to appear again. Maybe she'd stepped off into the woods. I opened my window slightly and called out, "Ma'am, you okay back there?" Nothing. Only the soft hiss of fog brushing against the car. Then I heard the click, the sound of my passenger door unlatching. I froze. Slowly turned my head. The door was cracked open about an inch, just enough for the dome light to flicker on, and that dim yellow light that makes everything look more wrong than it should. "Hello?" I said again, softer this time. No one answered. I reached over, half expecting to see her sitting there. Maybe she'd slipped in without me noticing. But the seat was empty. The smell hit me next, faint but distinct, wet wool, damp earth, and something like old metal, almost like rust. I touched the inside handle and jerked my hand back. It was wet, cold and slick, like rainwater, but it hadn't rained since afternoon. I got out, heart thudding, and circled the car with my phone light. Nothing. No footprints in the shoulder mud, no sign of anyone walking. The fog swallowed the beam a few feet in front of me like shining into milk. I shut the passenger door firmly, locked it. Then I wiped my hand on my jeans, got back behind the wheel, and started driving again. Slower now. Every creak of the car felt louder. 10 minutes later, I looked over and saw something that made my throat tighten. The seatbelt on the passenger side was buckled. I hadn't done that. The rest of the drive was a blur, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes flicking to the seat every few seconds. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that maybe I'd brushed against the buckle earlier and didn't notice. But when I finally stopped at a roadside cabin rental just outside Summersville, I noticed one more thing before I went inside. On the inside of the passenger window, written faintly, almost invisible unless the light hit just right, were 5 curved streaks. like someone had pressed their wet fingertips there, dragging them slowly downward. The cabin was a single-room rental, wood-paneled walls, old floral curtains, and that faint smell of mildew you only notice when you turn off the air conditioning. It was supposed to be cozy, but after that drive, it felt claustrophobic. I set my bag down, sat on the edge of the bed, and just listened for a while. The forest outside was thick with crickets and the occasional drip of water from the trees. Every so often, I thought I heard something else, a faint shuffle, like footsteps in the gravel drive. But when I looked out the window, there was nothing. I didn't sleep much, maybe an hour at most. At some point in the night, I woke up to what sounded like the creak of the front porch. Just one slow board bending, then silence. I told myself it was an animal, raccoon, deer, maybe even the wind. But my heart didn't buy it. In the morning, there were 2 damp footprints on the porch, bare feet, small with the impression of long toes. They led up to the door, stopped at the threshold, and didn't turn back. I packed up early. When I went to load my car, I saw that same streaked moisture on the inside of the passenger window again, faint but fresh, like condensation from a breath. That's when I noticed something else I hadn't before. The seatbelt, still buckled, was pulled tight, as if something heavy had been sitting there. I unbuckled it and drove off, trying not to think about it. The fog was lighter that morning, but the silence on the highway was heavier somehow. No birds, no cars, just me and the echo of the tires. I made it about 20 miles before I stopped for gas at a tiny station in a town called Birch Hollow, barely more than 2 streets and a diner. The attendant was an older guy with a baseball cap and a faded flannel shirt. While I filled up, I asked him, "Hey, anyone ever walk that stretch of Route 19 at night? Between here and Summersville?" He frowned, took his time answering. "You mean past Mill Creek Bend?" "Yeah, around there." He scratched his beard. "Ain't nobody walks there anymore, not since the rock slide." I paused. "What rock slide?" He nodded toward the hills. "About 10, 12 years back. Rained all week, ground gave out. Took half the shoulder with it. Caught a woman trying to walk to town after her car broke down. They found her the next morning. Well, most of her." I didn't say anything. He looked at my car, squinting. "You drive a gray sedan?" "Yeah." He nodded again, slower this time. "Someone sitting with you?" "No. Why?" He hesitated. "Saw a head in the passenger seat when you pulled in. Thought you had company." I looked back at my car. Through the fogged glass, the seat looked darker, like the shape of a person had just shifted away from view. When I got back inside, the air smelled faintly of wet wool again. I didn't look at the seat this time. I just drove. I don't take Route 19 anymore. I go an hour out of the way if I have to. I don't care. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and the fog gets thick, I catch myself glancing at the passenger window, because every now and then I still see those faint streaks, 5 lines curved downward, and I can still smell the rain, even when it hasn't fallen in hours. I was driving through Harlan County just after sundown, heading back toward Whitesburg after visiting a job site near the Kentucky border. It had been raining on and off all day, that kind of Appalachian drizzle that turns every dirt shoulder into a slick of mud and fog. The highway, Route 19, twisted through the hills like a dark vein, the kind of road where you rarely pass another car for miles. The radio barely worked that far out. It kept catching snippets of static, gospel hymns fading in and out between the crackle. I remember thinking how empty the mountains felt that night, like all the sound had been swallowed by the trees. That's when I saw him. He was standing just past the county line sign, tall, thin, wearing a denim jacket soaked to his shoulders. His face was shadowed under the brim of a dark cap. The kind of man you might pass without really seeing, except something about the way he stood there, motionless in the drizzle, one hand lifted halfway, like he wasn't sure he wanted a ride at all. I slowed down anyway. Out here, people help each other. My dad used to say the mountain roads are a kind of test. How you treat strangers out here says something about you. When he opened the passenger door, I noticed how quietly he moved. No thank you, no greeting. Just slid in and shut the door softly behind him. His clothes smelled faintly like wet dirt and engine oil. He looked maybe mid-30s, pale, clean-shaven, with deep lines around his mouth like someone who didn't smile much. "Where you headed?" I asked, eyes on the road. He didn't answer right away. I could hear the rain hitting the roof in waves. Finally, he said, barely above a whisper, "Up near the gas station, the old one, by the turnoff." I nodded. I knew the one, an old marathon station just before the road forks toward Cranks Creek. Place had been half shuttered for years, though I thought a clerk still ran it during the day. He didn't talk after that, just sat there, staring out the side window. Every now and then, lightning flashed behind the hills, lighting up his reflection in the glass. There was something strange about how still he was. Not nervous, not calm, just still. Like he was thinking about something far away. At one point, I tried again. "You from around here?" He shook his head slowly, eyes still fixed on the window. "Used to be." That was all he said. The silence after that felt heavier. I kept driving, watching the road snake through the mist. Every few miles, a flash of a mailbox or a collapsed barn would drift by in the headlights. The smell of wet pine seeped in through the cracked window. I started to feel a kind of unease I couldn't explain. Not fear exactly, but a weight. Like the longer I drove, the quieter the world got. Even the sound of the wipers started to seem distant. When I finally saw the glow of the gas station sign through the fog, I felt a small relief. I slowed the truck, pulled onto the gravel lot, and pointed toward the flickering lights. "This it?" I asked. He nodded once, his hand already on the door. He paused, like he was about to say something. But instead, he just looked at me, directly, for the first time. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless in the dim light. "Thanks for the ride," he said. Then he stepped out, closed the door, and started walking toward the gas station. I watched him in the rearview mirror as I pulled away. The mist swallowed him up before I hit the main road again. A few miles later, I realized I was still gripping the wheel too tight. The air in the cab felt colder than it should have been. I kept thinking about his voice, how flat it was, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. When I stopped at another gas station 15 minutes down the road, I decided to mention it to the clerk. Just small talk, you know, something like, "Picked up a hitchhiker back by the old marathon. Quiet guy heading this way." The clerk froze mid-swipe of the counter. He looked at me, then at the window like he wanted to make sure he'd heard me right. "You said where?" he asked slowly. "Near the county line, just past the bridge." Said he was heading to the old gas station. The man behind the counter didn't blink for a few seconds. Then he shook his head and muttered, almost to himself, "That stretch has been closed for years, man. Ain't nobody out there, not since the accident." "What accident?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. He glanced up at me, voice quieter now. "Guy got hit out there, about 5-6 years back. Walking that same road, matches what you just said, denim jacket, dark cap. They say he never made it to the station." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The buzzing of the ceiling light filled the silence. I laughed, but it sounded weak even to me. You're saying I picked up a ghost? The clerk didn't smile. I'm saying that road shouldn't have anyone on it. That night, I drove home faster than I should have. But somewhere along that dark stretch between counties, I found myself glancing at the passenger seat more than once, just to make sure it was still empty. A week passed before I went back through Harlan. I told myself it was just for work, a delivery job near Cumberland. But part of me knew why I really went. I wanted to see that stretch of Route 19 again, to prove to myself that it was just an old story, that I hadn't imagined what happened. The morning I drove out, fog hung thick across the ridges, the kind that doesn't lift until noon. The air smelled like wet earth and rotting leaves. When I reached the turnoff near the county line, I slowed down. The barricade the clerk had mentioned was there, rusted metal bars across the lane, road closed, spray-painted in faded orange. Weeds had grown up around the sign. I stopped the truck and cut the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a bird, not even the distant hum of traffic, just the sound of wind moving through the trees like something whispering. I got out and walked a little past the barricade. The road was cracked and soft with moss, tire marks long faded. Puddles of rainwater mirrored the sky. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground didn't quite want me there. About 100 yards in, I saw something on the shoulder, a dark scrap of fabric half buried in mud. I bent down. It was denim, torn at the seam, soaked and stiff from weather. I stood there for a long time, holding it. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it had been there for years. But when I looked up the road, I could almost picture him, that same quiet figure, standing just where I'd first seen him. I turned back fast. The fog had thickened, and for a split second I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, measured, just out of sync with my own. When I reached the truck, I realized something that made my chest tighten. The passenger side door was unlocked. I know I'd locked it. I always lock it. I drove the rest of the way to Cumberland in silence. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't look at the passenger seat. That night, I stayed at a motel off the main highway. Couldn't sleep. Every time a car passed outside, the headlights cut through the curtains and threw a shadow across the opposite wall, shaped like someone sitting in a chair. The next morning, when I started the truck, the windshield fogged up instantly. I wiped it with my sleeve. There, on the inside of the glass, was a faint smear, the outline of a hand. Since that night, I've stopped picking up hitchhikers. I still drive through those mountains sometimes for work, but I take a different route, even if it adds hours. Every now and then, when the mist is heavy and the road is quiet, I still find myself glancing at that empty seat beside me, half expecting to see him sitting there again, silent, pale-eyed, staring out at the fog. And each time I do, I feel that same cold, heavy air settle inside the cab, like he never really left that night, just hitched a ride somewhere deeper in me instead. I've driven through the Appalachian corridor more times than I can count, but that night sits in my mind like something stuck in my teeth. Small, impossible to forget. My brother, Cole, was behind the wheel of our rig, a faded red Freightliner that had more miles than either of us could remember. The dashboard lights glowed a dull amber as we climbed through the fog-thick ridges of West Virginia, hauling a load of lumber from Kentucky to Pennsylvania. It was close to midnight, and the rain had that slow, soaking rhythm that makes you want to pull over and sleep. But we were pushing through. The road was empty except for us. No headlights behind, no taillights ahead. Just the curve of Route 19 winding through the mist. Somewhere near Summersville, I started hearing it, a faint tapping, like a stick against metal. At first, I thought it was the rain hitting a loose panel, but it had rhythm. Deliberate. 3 short taps. Then silence. Then again. "Cole," I said, leaning forward. "You hear that?" He didn't answer right away. He always stared ahead like the road was whispering something only he could hear. Finally, he muttered, "Yeah, been hearing it for a while." He didn't sound concerned, but I saw the way his hand tightened on the wheel. We pulled over at a rest stop, the kind with broken vending machines and a flickering sodium light buzzing over cracked pavement. I got out, rain pattering on my jacket, and crouched down with my flashlight. The beam caught the underside of the trailer, just mud and rust. No loose parts, nothing swinging or caught. I remember standing there in the mist, feeling watched. Not by a person, just the kind of awareness you get deep in those mountains. Like the woods themselves are listening. We got back on the road. The tapping came again about 30 minutes later, faster this time. Cole turned down the radio and said nothing. I could feel the hum of the road under my boots, that steady vibration, but the tapping stood out. It didn't match the bumps of the asphalt. It came from under us, beneath the trailer floor. We stopped again near a pull-off where an old cabin sat half-collapsed in the trees. I walked the length of the rig with my flashlight, checking every latch, every strap. The smell of wet pine and diesel hung thick in the air. When I shone the light near the wheels, I thought I saw something. A dark streak across the mudguard, like a handprint. But when I wiped it with my sleeve, it just looked like road grime. I told myself I imagined it. We'd been driving for 16 hours. The mountains can play tricks on tired eyes. Back in the cab, Cole said quietly, "Let's just keep moving." We didn't talk much after that. The rain eased into a fine mist, and fog drifted low across the asphalt, turning the road into a tunnel of gray. I kept hearing that faint rhythm, 3 taps, pause, 3 more. Sometimes softer, sometimes closer. At one point, I thought I heard something scrape metal, like fingernails dragged across steel. When we finally reached the way station outside Beckley, dawn was beginning to show as a pale, watery light through the clouds. My nerves were fried. The air inside the cab smelled of coffee and damp clothes. I remember telling Cole that once we cleared the station, we'd park and sleep a few hours. But as soon as we rolled onto the scale, one of the officers inside waved us to the inspection lane. I figured it was just a random check. We'd had them before. Then the officer, a gray-haired guy with a tired face, came to my window and motioned for me to step out. His tone was calm, but his eyes looked strange, focused on something beneath the trailer. "Sir," he said, "I need you and your brother to shut off the engine and step away from the vehicle." Cole frowned. "Something wrong with the load?" The officer didn't answer. He was staring under the chassis, his flashlight trembling just slightly in his hand. Then he said something that chilled me even before I understood why. "There's blood," he said. "Fresh. You boys need to come with me." They led us to a small room beside the way station. Cinder block walls, coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. A second officer joined them, talking quietly into a radio. Cole sat across from me, his hands clasped, face pale under the fluorescent light. Nobody raised their voice. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The first officer, the older one, came back after a few minutes and said, "We need to ask you about the underside of your trailer." I nodded, throat dry. He continued, "There are handprints. Looks like someone tried to hold on underneath." For a moment, I couldn't process it. "Handprints?" He added, "They're fresh, still wet. They went out to photograph it." Cole stared at the table, jaw tight. "We didn't hit anyone. he said, barely above a whisper. "You know that, right?" I said nothing. After what felt like an hour, they let us walk back to the rig to confirm nothing had been tampered with. The sun was barely breaking through the fog. The world looked drained of color. I crouched beside the trailer, and that's when I saw them. 5 smudged handprints, smeared in dark red, dragged along the frame where the axles met. They looked like someone had been trying to crawl forward, like they'd been hanging on, desperate. The metal was still wet, sticky. The officer said they'd send it to the lab, but I already knew it wouldn't make sense. We'd stopped 3 times. I checked every inch. There was no one there, but those prints were fresh. Hours fresh. When they finally cleared us to leave, I drove in silence. Cole leaned against the window, eyes closed, face turned away. We didn't speak for the rest of the day. The sound of the tires on wet asphalt was all there was. That night, we parked at a lot behind a diner in Virginia. I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside, the wind through trees, the creak of the trailer, made my skin crawl. Around midnight, I climbed down from the cab and walked around the rig with a flashlight, just to prove to myself it was over. But something about the mud under the trailer looked disturbed again. Not handprints this time, just smears. Like something had brushed against it, dragging away from the center of the chassis toward the dirt. I shined the light farther, following the streaks until they faded into the grass and fog. The next morning, Cole was gone. His duffel bag still sat in the cab. His phone, too. The diner owner said he'd seen him walking toward the woods before sunrise. They never found him. It's been 4 years. I still drive sometimes, shorter routes now. Every so often, when the rain starts tapping on the roof and the road cuts through those same mist-covered ridges, I hear it again, that same faint rhythm under the floor. 3 short taps. Pause. 3 more. I tell myself it's just the road, the vibration, the memory. But when I stop and check, I never look too closely anymore, because I already know what I'll find, and I can't face it again. I'd been driving since noon, heading home from a 3-day job inspection in Bristol, Tennessee. It was early spring, one of those weeks when the Appalachian air can't decide between rain or fog. The clouds hung low, and the road twisted like a slow-moving snake through the mountains. I wasn't supposed to drive at night, but I wanted to sleep in my own bed again, my small apartment in Charleston, West Virginia. The highway was mostly empty, except for one car. A silver sedan, I think it was a Corolla, slipped onto the road behind me about 15 miles outside of Abingdon. At first, I didn't think much of it. We were both just heading north, hugging those dark curves where the trees leaned over the road like they were trying to listen. But what caught my eye wasn't the car itself, it was the consistency. No matter how fast or slow I went, the headlights stayed the same distance behind me, perfectly matched. I sped up, they sped up. I slowed down to a crawl on a long stretch where the fog pressed close to the windshield. They did the same. After 20 minutes, it stopped feeling like coincidence. The road signs started to blur. Small towns, half-dead gas stations, and shuttered diners that hadn't seen customers in years. My GPS lost signal somewhere near Saltville, and I realized I hadn't seen another vehicle in over half an hour. Just that same silver sedan. The rain began lightly, the kind that makes every sound softer. The hiss of tires, the hum of the engine, even my heartbeat. I remember rolling down the window a crack, hoping for some kind of grounding, a smell of wet pine or earth. But what came through smelled like rust and something burnt. The car was still there. I passed an old rest stop sign. Blue Hollow Rest Area, 2 miles. I didn't remember seeing that one before. Maybe it was one of those places built decades ago and forgotten, with soda machines that don't work and restrooms lit by flickering bulbs. But at that point, I didn't care. I needed to see the driver. I needed proof I wasn't just imagining this. I pulled in, gravel crackling under my tires. The rain had picked up, coming down in uneven bursts. The rest stop was exactly what I expected. 2 dim lamps glowing orange through fog, a single wooden bench warped with age, and an old vending machine humming faintly. Behind me, the silver sedan pulled in too. Same distance, same motion. It came to a stop about 30 feet away. The engine was still running, headlights cutting through the mist. I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the wheel, listening to my own breathing. I could see movement through the fogged glass of their windshield, just enough to tell someone was in there. Finally, I got out. The air was cold and heavy, and the rain soaked my shirt in seconds. I walked slowly toward the sedan, my boots crunching wet gravel. My heart was pounding, but not in a way that felt fearful. It was more like exhaustion mixed with disbelief. I just wanted to know why, but when I got close enough to see inside, I froze. The car was empty, completely empty. The headlights glared through the fog, and the engine hummed steadily. The driver's door was closed, but when I leaned closer, I noticed the seat. The dark gray fabric was soaked through, dripping as if someone had climbed out just moments before in a downpour. Except there hadn't been a downpour. Just that steady drizzle that hadn't been enough to soak a seat like that. I remember backing away, staring at the forest that surrounded the rest stop. Dense, black, silent. No movement, no voices. The sedan idled, driverless, fog creeping around its tires. And then, from somewhere behind the restrooms, I heard what sounded like a single step. Wet gravel shifting under weight. And then nothing. I should have left right then. Driven off, no questions asked. But curiosity is its own kind of sickness. I walked around the car, half expecting to see someone crouched behind it, maybe playing some twisted joke. Nothing, just the steady rhythm of the rain. I touched the hood, warm. The driver hadn't been gone long. I turned back toward my own car, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There were wet footprints leading from the sedan toward the restroom building. Bare feet. Each one clear against the concrete walkway, glistening under the dim yellow light. I followed them without thinking. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe I just didn't want to be alone with that feeling that something had been watching me for 50 miles. The footprints ended at the men's restroom door. It was propped open slightly by a small stone. Inside, a single bulb flickered above the mirror. It smelled like mildew and something metallic. The sink dripped in slow, irregular beats. I called out, just a soft, "Hey, you okay in there?" No answer. I waited. The silence pressed in, thicker than the fog outside. Then, faintly, from the last stall I heard breathing. Shallow, uneven, like someone trying not to be heard. I took one step closer. The air felt colder near the back, heavy with dampness. I could see the outline of someone's legs, just their feet visible under the stall door. Pale, bare. I opened my mouth to speak again, but before I could, the breathing stopped. Dead still. I don't know why, but I couldn't make myself push that door open. My body just refused. Instead, I backed away, keeping my eyes on that stall. When I finally stepped outside again, the rain had almost stopped, leaving a thick mist that hugged the ground. The sedan's headlights were off now, the engine too. But the driver's door was open. I didn't even go near it this time. I just got in my car and drove. Hard. I don't remember much of that drive except the sound of my own tires and how my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of Charleston hours later. When I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, I finally let myself breathe, until I glanced at my rearview mirror. There was a faint wet mark on the back seat, like someone had sat there just for a moment before getting out. That was 2 years ago. I don't take night drives anymore. I stay off the back highways, especially the ones that cut through the Appalachians. But every now and then, usually when it rains, I see that same silver sedan on the shoulder of some forgotten road. Engine running. Headlights on. No one inside. And even now, I can still smell it. That faint mix of rust, rain, and something burnt. It was supposed to be a quick drive through the mountains. I was heading from Bluefield to Asheville to visit my sister, a route I'd taken a dozen times before. But that night, the fog sat so heavy, it felt like driving through wet cotton. The road twisted endlessly, lined with black trees and thick air that smelled of rain and rot. The radio had died an hour ago. My phone said, "No service," and the only sound was the hum of my tires on the slick asphalt. Then my car sputtered once and died, just like that. The dashboard went dark except for the faint red blink of my hazard lights. The sound of the engine faded into silence, leaving only the soft tapping of rain on the windshield. I tried the ignition again, but it just made that dull choking noise like it was trying to breathe through mud. I sat there for a minute, staring into the fog. It was so thick I could barely see 5 feet past the hood. Every now and then, a shape would move, or maybe it was just the mist shifting. Either way, I didn't like it. There was no signal, so I got out to check for help. The air outside was freezing, and the smell hit me. Wet earth, gasoline, and something faintly metallic. The trees leaned close on both sides, their branches heavy with dripping moss. My flashlight cut through the fog like a weak beam underwater. There was nothing but the road and that endless white haze. About 20 feet down, I found one of those old green emergency phones, the kind you only see on back highways that barely get traffic anymore. The phone box was slick with condensation. I picked up the receiver, half expecting it to be dead, but a woman's voice answered almost immediately. "Highway assistance, this is dispatch. What's your emergency?" I told her where I was, what had happened. My voice sounded small in that damp quiet. She asked me to stay calm and said she'd send a tow truck from Tazewell. Then her tone shifted slightly. "Sir, I need you to stay in your vehicle, okay? Keep your doors locked and your lights on." I frowned. "Why? Is there something wrong?" A pause. Then she said softly, "They're looking for someone out there tonight." The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the rain dripping down my collar, the fog pressing against me like a living thing. I didn't know what she meant. A convict, maybe? A bear? Whatever it was, I didn't want to find out. So, I went back to the car, locked the doors, and sat there with my hazards blinking red against the fog. The rhythmic pulse felt almost hypnotic. Light, dark, casting the inside of the car in waves of crimson. Time crawled. The cold crept in. Every noise outside sounded magnified. The distant snap of a twig, the crunch of wet leaves, the whisper of something brushing against metal. Once, I thought I saw movement in the rearview mirror, a shadow too tall to be an animal. But when I turned around, there was nothing. An hour passed. Maybe more. Then, tap. Just one sound. A light, deliberate tap on my passenger window. I froze. The hazard lights flashed, and for a split second I thought I saw a face. But it was gone before I could be sure. Maybe just a trick of light and fog. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just outside, watching me through that mist. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. When the tow truck's headlights finally cut through the fog 2 hours later, I nearly cried from relief. The driver climbed out, a big man in a reflective jacket, and walked up slowly, waving. He leaned down to my window, his breath fogging the glass. "You're lucky," he said. His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes kept flicking toward the dark woods behind us. They just found someone torn apart half a mile up the road. I stared at him, not sure I'd heard right. "Torn apart?" He nodded slowly. "Stay in the truck. I'll hook your car." As he turned away, I noticed something strange. His boots were caked with mud, but the mud wasn't brown. It was dark, almost black, and wet, as if he'd walked through something thicker than soil. When I glanced back at my car one last time, I thought I saw faint handprints on the fogged glass of the passenger window. 5 long streaks sliding down. But I told myself it was just condensation, just the fog. The ride down the mountain was dead silent. The tow truck rattled as it climbed each turn, the engine groaning like it didn't want to move forward. The driver's name was Carl. He kept his eyes on the road, both hands gripping the wheel, as though he didn't trust the darkness around us. After a few miles, I tried to make conversation. Did they find who did it? He didn't answer right away. The only sound was the rain ticking on the roof. Finally, he said, "You're not from around here, are you?" "No," I said, "just passing through." He nodded once, as if that explained everything. Then, "Things happen out here. You stay long enough, the mountain changes the way you see things." I wasn't sure what that meant. I turned toward the window, but the fog outside was so thick I could see our reflection more than the road. For a moment, I thought I saw movement behind us, like someone walking just beyond the taillights. But when I blinked, it was gone. We passed a sign half buried in weeds, Cold Hollow, 2 miles. I'd never heard of it. A few minutes later, the truck slowed. The headlights hit something on the side of the road. A small car flipped halfway into a ditch. My stomach dropped when I saw it was the same make and color as mine. But mine was still chained behind us. "Another accident?" I asked quietly. Carl didn't answer. He just drove faster. When we finally reached a service station, one of those old ones with a single pump and a flickering light, I climbed out, legs shaking. I wanted to call someone, but the payphone inside was broken, wires hanging loose from the receiver. My phone still had no service. Carl was standing outside, staring back toward the mountain. His expression was unreadable. "You'll want to stay off that pass for a while," he said. "They won't tell the public what they found, just keep driving once you leave here." He didn't charge me, didn't even take my name. Just turned, got back in his truck and drove off without headlights until the fog swallowed him whole. I waited for daylight before driving away, but even as I left, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. They're looking for someone out there tonight. 2 weeks later, I read a small local report online. It said a hiker had gone missing near Cold Hollow. They found remains, but nothing identifiable, just scattered clothes and blood across the asphalt, as if something had dragged them from the road into the trees. What made me drop my phone, though, was the photo attached to the article, a picture of the emergency phone booth on that same stretch of highway. In the background, blurred by fog, was a white sedan with its hazards blinking, and sitting inside, slumped in the driver's seat, was someone wearing the same jacket I'd worn that night. They never explained it. They never even mentioned a second body. But sometimes late at night when I drive through the mountains, I still see those red hazard lights pulsing in the distance. And I swear, they blink in time with my heartbeat. I started that delivery route in early November, just before the first frost settled over the hills. The company I worked for had just expanded service into the Appalachian region, and my job was to map out the rural roads, marking GPS coordinates, checking accessibility, logging any hazards. Most of the roads were narrow, cracked, and half swallowed by trees, but that was part of the job. Route 79 was different, though. It wasn't even on the company map yet. A local at a gas station in Clay County mentioned it to me when I was filling up. Said it cut through the ridge and came out near an old coal town called Winlock. "You'll save half an hour that way," he told me, lighting a cigarette. The road started out paved, but quickly turned to gravel. It wound through thick forest, the trees hanging so low they scraped the roof of my van. Fog drifted in thin ribbons across the road, and every sound, my tires, the hum of the engine, seemed swallowed by the damp air. About a mile in, I saw the first cross. It was handmade, 2 rough sticks lashed together with twine, driven into the mud just beside the road. I didn't think much of it at first. You see a lot of roadside memorials out here. But then, exactly 1 mile later, there was another, and another. By the time I'd gone 6 miles, I'd counted 6 crosses. Each one the same size, same build, same placement. Not too close to the road, but close enough you couldn't miss it. It wasn't until the 4th one that I noticed my GPS had gone dead. The signal bar dropped to 0 and stayed there. When I tried refreshing the map, it froze on a blank white screen. I figured it was just the terrain. These mountains eat signal for breakfast. But when I passed the 5th cross, my radio cut out too, just static. Something about that bothered me more than it should have. I reached Winlock around dusk. The town was nearly empty. Just a few trailers, an old feed store, and a man sitting outside the general shop drinking a beer. I stopped and asked him about the crosses. He squinted at me for a long time before saying, "Those ain't memorials." I asked what he meant. He took another drink and said, "They're warnings. You'll figure it out if you keep driving that road at night." Then he just looked past me, like he'd already said too much. The air had turned colder by the time I headed back. The fog was thicker, the forest darker. I tried to take the same route home, but every time I turned onto Route 79, the GPS blinked out again, like clockwork. That night, I sat in my motel room with the window cracked, listening to the rain tapping against the sill. I opened my laptop, trying to log the route data, but the coordinates for that stretch were gone. Just blank entries where the road should have been. Before I went to bed, I noticed something strange on my shoes. Mud splatter, thick and gray, with little flecks of wood in it. It smelled faintly like burnt pine. I didn't remember stepping in anything like that. I tried to sleep, but the sound of the rain changed at some point. It became uneven, broken, like something tapping on the window glass in a slow, irregular rhythm. When I finally looked, there was nothing there, just fog pressing against the glass. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been marking that road for a reason, and somehow I'd crossed it. I went back the next morning, couldn't help myself. I needed to finish mapping that route, and part of me wanted to prove there was nothing strange about it. The fog hadn't lifted. It hung low over the trees like smoke. The crosses were still there, 6 in total, exactly 1 mile apart. But something about them looked different in daylight. The wood was darker, slick with moisture, and the twine had frayed like it had been there for years. Only, I was sure they hadn't. When I reached the 4th cross, I pulled over. I wanted to check the ground, see who might have put them there. But as soon as I stepped out, my phone lost signal again. The air felt colder. The silence was total, like the forest had shut itself off. I crouched by the cross. The earth beneath it was disturbed, like it had been dug up and refilled. I brushed away some of the mud with my hand. Beneath the top layer, I saw something pale, looked like cloth, or maybe plastic. I didn't dig any deeper. That's when I heard it. A faint clicking sound, rhythmic, coming from somewhere up the road, not like an animal or an engine, more like a camera shutter. I got back in the van and kept driving, slower now. The noise came and went, always just ahead of me. By the 6th cross, I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped and got out again. The air stank of rot, wet leaves and something older. There were tire marks in the mud, faded but fresh enough to still hold shape. A van, my van. Only they led the wrong direction, away from where I'd come. I looked down the road ahead. The fog was thicker there, swallowing everything past a few yards. I tried to listen, to make sense of what I was hearing beneath the silence. For a moment, I swore I heard my own engine idling in the distance. I turned back fast and drove off, my hands shaking so bad I could barely shift gears. The moment I passed the first cross again, the GPS reconnected. Music flooded back through the radio. It was like crossing a border between two worlds. I didn't stop until I reached the motel. That night, I tried looking up Route 79 again. I couldn't find any official record of it. County maps skipped from Route 78 straight to 80. Even satellite view showed nothing but forest. But the part that really messed with me came later, when I was writing my report. I plugged in the last known coordinates from my GPS log. When I matched them against the map, something clicked. Each cross lined up perfectly with the points where my GPS had lost signal. 6 dead zones, 6 markers, 6 warnings. I sent the data in anyway, told myself it was just interference from the mountains. But I've never driven that stretch again. And sometimes, when I'm on other back roads in the dark, I still catch a glimpse of something by the ditch. Just a thin shape of wood, tied with twine, leaning in the mud. Last month, I heard that another driver took the route after me. They said his van was found near the ridge, out of gas, doors unlocked. GPS fried. They never found him. Now, every time I pass a roadside cross, I wonder if it's for someone who died there, or someone who disappeared before they were supposed to. Either way, I keep driving, and I never look when the signal drops. I used to work nights as a highway patrol officer along Route 41, a 2-lane stretch winding through the Appalachian foothills of southern West Virginia. They called it the Deer Run, not because of the number of deer that lived there, but because of how many supposedly got hit by cars. Every few nights, dispatch would get a call. Possible animal strike, heavy blood on the road. But when we got there, there were never any bodies. Just long, glistening trails of blood that led into the woods and, more disturbingly, deep drag marks coming back toward the asphalt. At first, we laughed it off. Bears, maybe, coyotes dragging scraps. But I worked that route enough to know something wasn't right. My shift started at 7 p.m. It was late autumn, fog thick enough to choke on, trees skeletal against a sky that looked bruised purple. My partner, Dale, was out sick that week, so I rode alone. The cruiser heater clicked every few minutes, pushing out air that smelled faintly of dust and pine. By 9:30, I got the call. Possible hit on mile marker 22. Caller says there's blood all over the guardrail. The road out there curled like a snake around the base of Bent Ridge. Few houses, fewer lights. Just that endless tunnel of trees pressing in on both sides. When I got there, my headlights caught the red smear first. It glistened across the pavement in thick streaks. But there was something else. Something off about the pattern. It wasn't a splash, it was dragged. I parked, stepped out, and the smell hit me. Iron, wet earth, and rot. I followed the trail to the edge of the guardrail where the grass sloped down toward the woods. The flashlight beam caught movement. Flies, mostly, and something white tangled in the brush. I leaned closer. It wasn't fur, it was cloth. A torn piece of fabric, light blue, maybe from a shirt, stuck to a branch, stiff with dried blood. I scanned the woods, calling out, "Hello, anyone out there?" Silence. Just the faint drip of water from the trees. I followed the drag marks about 10 feet into the woods before I stopped. The soil was soft, fresh, almost as if it had been disturbed recently. There were prints, large ones, but not shaped like boots, more like deep impressions where something heavy had been hauled. I crouched down and touched the dirt. Cold. Then I heard it. Branches cracking deeper in the woods. Slow. Deliberate. I froze, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. Another crack, then nothing. After a minute, I backed out to the road, radioed it in, and marked the scene for the morning crew. But before I drove off, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. One of the drag marks led from the woods back to the road again, stopping right beside my cruiser. When I knelt down to look closer, I saw faint boot prints overlapping the drag marks. Heavy ones. Deep tread. The kind of boots we wore on patrol. I checked my own prints. They didn't match. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been out there. Someone watching. 2 nights later, I was back on Route 41. The weather had turned mean. Rain pounding so hard the wipers couldn't keep up. I shouldn't have been out there alone, but I volunteered. I needed to see for myself what was going on. Mile marker 22 came up around midnight. Even through the rain, I could see the dark stain still on the pavement. Nobody had cleaned it yet. I pulled over, stepped out, and the world went quiet except for the rain hitting my jacket. The forest on both sides looked endless, just black shapes moving behind sheets of mist. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight. That's when I saw it. A faint glow deeper in the woods. Not bright, just a soft orange pulse, like the reflection of a lantern. I hesitated, then crossed the guardrail and followed the narrow animal trail downhill. My boots sank into the mud with every step. The smell of wet decay filled the air. After about 50 yards, I found where the glow was coming from. A small clearing with an old rusted truck half buried in vines. The cab light was flickering faintly, and beside it, a shape. Something long, wrapped in plastic. At first, I thought it was roadkill, but as I got closer, the shape became clearer. Arms, legs, bound tightly with duct tape. I stepped back, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the rain. Then I saw the badge, tarnished, faded, but definitely a patrol badge. It was pinned to the body's chest. I wiped the mud from it with my glove. The nameplate was almost worn off, but I could make out the letters D. Harris. Dale, my partner, the one who'd called in sick. I stumbled backward, tripping on a root. The flashlight fell, beam spinning wildly until it caught something else in the brush. Another trail of drag marks leading away from the clearing, toward the road, and beside them, a set of boot prints, fresh, deep, exactly like mine. I turned toward the road, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My thoughts blurred together. Maybe someone was framing us. Maybe Dale had stumbled onto something. Then I saw movement between the trees. A silhouette, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a patrol jacket. For a moment, I thought it was him. I called out, "Dale?" The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, barely visible through the fog. Then it turned and walked slowly back into the woods, dragging something behind it. I wanted to chase it, but I couldn't move. My body wouldn't listen. Instead, I backed away until I reached the road, soaked, shaking. I drove straight to the station and told them what I saw. They sent a search team at dawn. When they got there, the clearing was empty. No truck, no body, no badge. just the drag marks, fresh and deep, leading all the way up to the edge of the asphalt. They said I must have been mistaken, fatigued, maybe even hallucinating. Dale had gone missing, sure, but they found his cruiser 3 counties away, empty. They took me off duty a week later. I never went back to Route 41. Still, sometimes, when I drive those back roads at night, I see the bloodstains glinting under the high beams, the same looping marks cutting across the asphalt. And sometimes, just for a second, I swear I see someone standing at the tree line, wearing my jacket. It was close to midnight when I decided to take the old stretch of Route 63 through the Appalachian foothills. I'd been driving back from visiting my brother in North Carolina, and the GPS had glitched, rerouting me through what felt like the middle of nowhere. Winding blacktop roads that twisted through fog-thick valleys and endless trees. The fog that night was like wet cotton. My high beams barely cut through it, and every mile felt slower than the last. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour when I noticed a set of hazard lights glowing faintly through the mist ahead, amber flashes bouncing off the fog like dying fireflies. I slowed down. It was a van, an old white Dodge Caravan, pulled halfway onto the shoulder. Steam rose from the hood, and the left rear tire was flat. I remember thinking how strange it was to see a family car all the way out there, that late, that deep into the mountains. As I rolled to a stop behind them, I could make out shapes through the fogged-up windows. A woman sat in the driver's seat, a man standing by the open hood, and 2 small figures in the back. I stepped out and called, "You folks need a hand?" The man didn't respond right away. He just stood there, bent slightly over the engine, his back to me. Then, without turning, he said, "We're fine, go on." But he didn't sound fine. His voice was low, calm, but strained, like he was holding something back. The woman in the driver's seat rolled her window down halfway. Her hair was damp and stringy, and her hands shook on the steering wheel. "Please," she said softly, "you shouldn't stop. He'll be mad if we talk." I froze for a second, confused. "Ma'am, do you need me to call someone? I've got signal for a mile or so back." Her eyes darted toward the man at the hood. "Don't," she whispered, "please don't." That's when I noticed the kids, or what I thought were kids, sitting in the back seat. They were small, heads turned away from me, faces hidden by the fogged glass. Not moving, not even a twitch. Something about that stillness made my stomach tighten. I tried to look closer through the side window, but the fog inside the car made everything blur. "Are the kids all right?" I asked. The woman didn't answer. Her hands trembled harder now, and I could hear her breathing quicken. The man slammed the hood shut so hard the van shook. He turned toward me, tall, soaked with rain and grease, but I couldn't make out his face. He started walking around to the driver's side. "You should go," he said again, this time quieter. I took a step back. "Look, I was just trying to help." The woman's eyes flicked up at me, wide, desperate. "Please," she whispered again, "he'll be mad if we talk." Something inside me said to leave. So I did. I backed away toward my car, watching them through the haze. The man got into the driver's seat. The hazard lights clicked off. As I climbed into my car and put it in drive, I glanced one last time through my mirror. The van sat still in the fog, no lights, no movement. About a mile down the road, I realized I was shaking. My hands were slick with sweat. I tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. Maybe they were just having a family fight. Maybe the kids were asleep. But then I thought about how quiet it had been. Not one word from the children. Not one movement. Just fog and stillness. When I looked back again in the mirror, the road behind me was empty. The van was gone. I couldn't shake it. Even after I made it home, the image of that woman's face stayed in my head. Pale, trembling, her eyes begging me for something I couldn't name. 2 weeks later, I had to drive that route again for work. Against my better judgment, I took the same road, Route 63, partly because I wanted to know if I'd imagined it all. The fog came early that evening, rolling down the slopes like breath over glass. I recognized the turn, the curve where I'd stopped that night. I slowed, expecting to see nothing, just a shoulder and a tree line. But I saw something. On the right side of the road, half hidden in weeds and vines, sat a white van. Same model, same dented bumper. The tires were flat, the glass streaked with rain. I pulled over again. My heart was hammering, but curiosity pushed me forward. The van looked like it had been there for years, rust blooming around the doors, moss creeping up the wheels. When I peeked through the passenger side window, I saw 3 small car seats lined up in the back. Empty, they were spotless. No dust, no dirt, no sign of decay, as if someone cleaned them recently. The air inside the van smelled strange, like old fabric and damp wood. And there was something else, a faint, sweet smell, like rot hidden under perfume. On the dashboard, tucked under a cracked photo frame, was a folded piece of paper. I hesitated, then reached in through the broken vent window and pulled it out. It was a receipt. Dated October 3rd, 1998. Gas station off Route 63. The name written in faded ink, The Burks. That date made my chest tighten. Almost 25 years ago. I took a photo on my phone and stepped back. The fog had thickened, curling around the trees, swallowing sound. That's when I heard it. A soft creak, like a car door shifting under weight. I turned. The van door was ajar, just slightly. My throat went dry. I hadn't touched it. Through the crack, I could see the edge of a blanket inside, folded neatly, tucked into one of the car seats. It had cartoon animals on it, faded but clean. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the van. When I got back to my car, I sat there for a long time, engine idling, watching that shape in the fog. It didn't move again. A few days later, I stopped at a diner near the edge of town, the kind with old newspaper clippings pinned to the walls. As I waited for my coffee, one of those clippings caught my eye. Family of 4, missing after breakdown on Route 63, October 1998. The article had a photo, a woman, a man, and 2 small children. The woman's eyes were unmistakable. The last paragraph said the van was never found. I stared at that yellowed clipping for a long time before leaving. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen, what I still see when I drive that road. Because sometimes, late at night, when the fog gets thick and the air smells like wet rust and pine, I'll catch those same amber flashes ahead, hazard lights blinking faintly through the mist. And every time, I keep driving. But I swear, I can still hear a woman's voice, soft and trembling, carried through the fog. Please, he'll be mad if we talk. I've been driving an ambulance for almost 9 years now, mostly the night shifts. There's something about the dark that slows everything down. The roads are emptier, the calls fewer, and the silence between sirens feels heavier. My route covers a long stretch of the Appalachian foothills. Narrow, winding roads carved through endless trees, old mining towns with one gas station still open, and the kind of fog that makes you think you're the only person alive for miles. It was a Thursday night in late November, the kind of cold where your breath fogs inside the cab. My partner, Curtis, sat beside me, half asleep, his head bobbing with every bump. The radio crackled with the same static hum it always did up here, broken by the dispatcher's voice. Unit 49, single vehicle rollover, Route 52 near mile marker 118. Possible injury. Caller didn't stay on the line. I remember glancing at Curtis. He just groaned, rubbed his eyes, and said, "Another drunk driver." Route 52 cut through the hills like a snake. No lights, no houses, just trees pressing in on both sides. It took us almost 20 minutes to reach the mile marker, but there was no sign of headlights, no smoke, no movement. Then I saw it. The glint of twisted metal reflecting our beams. The car had gone off the shoulder, nose first into a ditch, half hidden by underbrush. Steam rose faintly from the hood, mingling with the mist that clung to the trees. I killed the siren and we climbed out. The cold hit hard, that sharp mountain air that smells like pine and wet earth. The car was a gray sedan, flipped on its side. The front windshield was spiderwebbed with cracks, but not from the outside. It was punched outward, like something inside had broken free. Curtis shined his flashlight through the shattered window. "No one's here," he muttered. The driver's door was open, the seatbelt hanging loose, still locked. A purse lay on the passenger floor soaked with rain, its contents spilled, lipstick, keys, a pack of gum, and an ID, Megan F. Dawson, age 27. I noted the time, the scene, procedure. But the longer we stood there, the more the quiet pressed in. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. Then I heard it, faint, but there, a whispering sound. It wasn't the wind, it was coming from the car's dashboard. Curtis leaned in, frowning. The radio was still on, though the car's battery had to be dying. Through the static, a low, steady voice murmured something, too soft to make out at first. I turned the volume knob slightly, and that's when we both heard it clearly. 35.21, 78.46. Coordinates. The whisper repeated them, again and again. Curtis backed away. "Probably GPS interference," he said, though his voice wasn't convincing. I jotted the numbers down. Old habit. Sometimes dispatchers relay coordinates from phones when signals drop. Maybe she'd wandered off. Maybe she was hurt. We called it in. Dispatch said no other reports had come in from that area. No phone pings, nothing. Then, as if on cue, the radio in our ambulance, still on our dashboard, flickered. For half a second, I swear, it played the same voice, the same coordinates. Curtis shut it off. "We're not following that," he said. "We'll wait for state troopers." But something in me itched. Maybe it was instinct or exhaustion, or the need to make sense of the broken windshield and the missing driver. The coordinates, when I entered them into my phone, showed a spot only a few miles deeper into the forest. We waited 30 minutes for troopers that never came. Radio contact was gone, no signal. Finally, Curtis sighed. "You're not gonna drop this, are you?" I didn't answer. I just turned on the high beams, followed the coordinates, and drove us deeper into the dark. The road narrowed fast, gravel and mud, more a trail than a road. Branches scraped the sides of the ambulance like fingernails on metal. After a while, the headlights reflected off fog so thick it looked solid. About 2 miles in, we came to a clearing. The GPS arrow blinked. We were right on top of the coordinates. We killed the engine. The silence was complete. No crickets, no wind. Just the soft creak of cooling metal. Curtis stepped out, muttering about bad ideas, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist. I followed, the wet ground sucking at my boots. At first, there was nothing, just trees and fog. Then we saw something pale up ahead, the shape of another vehicle. But it wasn't another car. It was a door, just a door, half buried upright in the ground, frame and all, as if someone had planted it there. The wood was swollen and green with rot. No handle, no hinges. Curtis laughed nervously. Art project, has to be. But the mud around it was disturbed. Footprints, dragging marks, something heavy pulled across the ground. There was a faint buzzing sound, like static. I realized it was coming from my radio again. I turned the dial, and the whisper returned. 35.21, 78.46. The same voice, the same words. But now, beneath it, I heard breathing. Curtis stepped closer to the door, shined his light down, and froze. "Airs," he said quietly. "Look at this." Half covered by leaves, something white jutted out from the mud near the base of the door. It was the corner of a windshield. We brushed away the dirt and realized it wasn't glass. It was plastic, curved like the visor of a helmet, except it wasn't a helmet. It was the top half of a broken paramedic face shield. Ours. We stood there, motionless. I could feel the pulse in my throat. Curtis looked around, panicked now. "We need to go, now." But the static from the radio grew louder, harsher, until it was almost a scream. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. In the dead quiet that followed, I heard footsteps. Not behind us, beneath us, muffled, slow, like something moving through the wet ground under our feet. I remember the look on Curtis's face before we ran. Pale, hollow, confused. We didn't talk. We just got back in the ambulance and drove until we hit asphalt again. When we finally reached the main road, dispatch said they'd been trying to reach us for over an hour. They hadn't sent any other units to Route 52. A few days later, I called the trooper's office to ask what they found at the crash site. They said there was no record of an accident that night. No Megan Dawson, no car, nothing. Curtis quit 2 weeks later, moved to South Carolina. I stayed on, but I never drive Route 52 anymore. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in the cab at night, I turn on the radio just to fill the silence, and once in a while, through the static, I swear I still hear that voice. 35.21, 78.46, repeating, waiting. I was somewhere between Clay County and the Boone line when I saw the flashing lights. The road, Route 41, was a thin ribbon cutting through miles of forest, the kind of stretch where the GPS loses its mind and the radio fades into static. I'd driven it before, but not at night. The fog had settled low, hugging the guardrails, and the rain had that slow, whispering sound. Barely enough to see, but just enough to make everything slick and silver under my headlights. I was coming back from a late repair job out in Gully Bridge, a small-town power line job that ran late because one of the poles had split in half. I remember thinking I just wanted to get home, eat something warm, and sleep. My windshield wipers squealed with every pass, and for a long stretch there was nothing ahead but black. Then came the red and blue lights. They flickered faintly in my mirror, then brighter. My first thought was that I'd been speeding, though I hadn't seen another soul on the road for miles. I slowed down, heart thudding, and pulled over to the shoulder. The cruiser stopped behind me, lights still rotating in the mist. When I looked back, something seemed off. There were no headlights, just the emergency lights, and no glow from a dashboard or dome light. Just darkness behind those flashing reds and blues. Still, I rolled my window down and waited. A minute passed, then another. Finally, I heard slow, heavy footsteps on wet asphalt. They stopped just short of my window. Then a flashlight beam hit my eyes. "Evening, officer," I said, squinting against the light. The man didn't reply at first. He just stood there, breathing slow and steady. I could hear the hiss of the rain on his jacket, smell the faint scent of wet wool. Then he spoke, voice low and gravelly. "You shouldn't be on this road after dark." It wasn't a command, more like a warning. I blinked, trying to see his face, but the light stayed trained on me. "Sorry, I didn't know there were restrictions. I'm just heading home." Silence. The rain picked up a little, tapping against the roof. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded a little different, like he was speaking through something thick. "Turn around," he said. "Go back the way you came." Then, as quick as it started, the light disappeared. I blinked into darkness. My eyes adjusted, and I looked to the window. There was no one there, no footsteps, no flashlight beam. I turned around in my seat. The cruiser was gone. Not driving away, not parked, just gone. The road behind me was black and empty. The mist swallowed everything past the edge of my taillights. For a long moment I sat there, shaking. I told myself maybe I'd fallen asleep for a second, or maybe I'd mistaken some reflection from a hill or a truck further off. But the sound of boots on pavement, those were real. And that voice. I turned the car off and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The smell of wet pine hit me. My boots sank slightly into the shoulder's mud. No tire tracks behind me. Not even a dent in the grass. Just the hum of insects and the faint trickle of water somewhere in the dark. When I got back in the car, my hands were trembling. I drove the rest of the way home with my high beams on, checking the mirror every few seconds. The fog seemed thicker after that, like it was following me. By the time I reached Summersville, the rain had stopped. My headlights cut across an empty intersection, and I saw something flash in the reflection of a stop sign. 2 faint red-blue lights disappearing behind the trees. I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, I went to the county sheriff's office to report what I'd seen. I didn't really expect them to believe me, but I figured I should at least mention it. Maybe someone else had seen that unmarked cruiser. The deputy behind the desk, a young guy, mid-20s, listened politely, then looked at me like I'd said I'd seen a ghost. "Sir," he said, "we don't have any units that run unmarked patrols on 41, especially not after dark. That stretch is restricted. Landslides a few years back took out part of the west shoulder." I asked if maybe a state trooper had been patrolling, but he shook his head. Then he added something that stuck with me. "You're not the first person to say that." He went quiet after that, like he regretted it. When I pressed, he told me a few truckers had called in over the years about a phantom stop near the gorge. Always the same story. Flashing lights. An officer who said something vague, then gone. Most of them laughed it off. One didn't. He said a man had stopped for the cruiser, stepped out to talk, and was later found 100 yards down the ravine. The cause of death wasn't clear. His car was still parked on the shoulder, engine running. I drove back to Route 41 that afternoon. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was guilt, I don't know. The road felt different in daylight, smaller, quieter. The trees leaned in over the asphalt, their bare branches tangled above like old bones. When I reached the curve where I'd been stopped, I pulled over again. The mud had hardened since the rain, and I noticed something half buried by the guardrail, a piece of glass, long and rectangular. When I brushed the dirt off, I realized it was a fragment of a headlight cover, police issue by the look of it. Faded lettering along the edge read WVHP. I pocketed it, unsure why. Then I saw something else. Tire tracks leading off the road, down toward the slope. They were faint but fresh. I followed them until the ground softened under my boots. About 30 feet down, I saw a rusted shape buried in the undergrowth. Metal twisted and sunken into the earth. An old cruiser. The paint was mostly gone. but the faint outline of the state police emblem was still visible on the door. There was no sign of movement, no sounds except the creak below. When I leaned closer, I saw the driver's door still partly open. Inside, hanging from the rearview mirror, was a cracked flashlight. The handle had the same grip pattern I remembered, the same kind that had blinded me that night. I backed away slowly. The wind shifted, carrying that same smell, wet wool and metal. By the time I got to my truck, my pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't look back when I drove off. That was 6 months ago. Sometimes, when I take late-night jobs in the hills, I'll see lights flicker behind me on an empty stretch of road. Just for a second. And every time, my first instinct is to pull over. But I don't anymore. Because now I know what waits if I do. And every time I pass Route 41, I still hear that voice in my head. Quiet, gravelly, and certain. You shouldn't be on this road after dark.